Okay, to conclude this very brief introduction to the working group summaries for policymakers, this is the Adaptation Working Group 2 Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability report, and this is the final piece of that summary. These are diverse feasible climate responses and adaptation options that exist to respond to representative key risks of climate change with varying synergies with mitigation, multidimensional feasibility and synergies with mitigation of climate responses and adaptation options relevant in the near term at global scale and up to 1.5 degrees C of global warming. So many caveats there in terms of what these are considered for, and there are many details. So there are representative key risks and system transitions, climate responses and adaptation options, potential feasibility in terms of high, medium and low, and confidence levels in terms of dark blue and this pinkish purplish color and low confidence. And you have various systems, synergies with mitigation. Dimensions of potential feasibility include economic, technological, institutional, social, environmental and geophysical. So there are we looked at biophysical limitations to net zero, for example. So those kinds of things have to be considered here as well. And looking at footnotes, the term response is used here instead of adaptation because some responses such as retreat may or may not be considered to be adaptation. So if coastal sea level rise and risks and erosion are increasing, then is retreating from the coast an adaptation, or is it just a bailing out option? So those kind of things have to be considered as responses rather than adaptations, including sustainable forest management, forest conservation and restoration, reforestation and afforestation in some of these things. Migration, when voluntary, safe and orderly, allows reduction of the risks to climate and non-climatic stressors. Okay, so let's just look at the range here. Confidences go from high to low, as you can see the size of the circles, and confidence levels go from high to low as well, as you see from the colors. And the representative, so let's look at system transitions. You are considering land and ocean ecosystems, urban and infrastructure systems, energy systems, cross-sectoral sectors, and so on. And key representative risks include coastal socio-ecological systems, terrestrial and ocean ecosystem services, water security and food security. And here in urban infrastructure include critical infrastructure networks and services. Energy systems include water security, critical infrastructure, networks and services. So coastal sectoral include human health, living standards, equity, peace and human mobility, and other cross-sectoral, cross-cutting risks. Okay, climate responses and adaptation options, just to make sure we understand what are considered. Coastal defenses and hardening integrated coastal zone management depends on what is affordable rather than what level of sea level rise is being projected. Forest-based adaptation, sustainable aquaculture, fisheries, agroforestry, biodiversity management and ecosystem connectivity. We've talked about these in various contexts. Water use efficiency and water resource management, improved cropland management, efficient livestock systems, and so on. Okay, so potential feasibilities include all for each of these system transitions and for each climate responses and climate adaptation options and synergies with mitigation. So in some cases it's not assessed, in some cases it is assessed with high confidence and high feasibility, and so on. for each. I won't go through each matching pair here because that's a very long list, but you can definitely look up depending on your specific interest and specific region and the risk that you may be interested in or your community may be facing. You can go through these and see where you end up. So economic feasibility, dimensions of potential feasibility with medium feasibility, and this is dimension of potential feasibility. So the circles are just level of feasibility. Confidence is not given here. So you can see that various levels of confidence for dimension of feasibility in terms of economic, technological, institutional. So you can see that in some cases there is very low feasibility for the institutional dimension, and social dimension is high in some cases and very low in some cases, like for example peace and humanity, planned relocation and resettlement and human migration. Everything is low across the board here. Okay, so that's something that is something we have to consider, people's reluctance to move or difficulty of implementing those things. Environmental feasibility and geophysical feasibility, some cases not applicable, and some places very low confidence and very low feasible, sorry, not confidence, very low feasibility. Okay, so finally, the climate responses and adaptation options have benefits for ecosystems, ethnic groups, gender equity, low-income groups, and the Sustainable Development Goals, relations of sectors and groups at risk as observed, and SDGs relevant in the near term at global scale and up to 1.5 degrees C global warming, with climate responses and adaptation options. So again, I won't read the whole thing, but we are dealing essentially with the same thing. System transitions in land and ocean ecosystems, urban and infrastructure systems, energy systems, and coral cross-sectoral, and climate responses and adaptations as before. Observed relation with sectors and groups at risk include ecosystems and their services, ethnic groups, gender equity, and low-income groups, and then they are mapped onto Sustainable Development Goals 1 to 17, whether they are synergistic, there are trade-offs involved, or whether they are opposing, so with disbenefits to the Sustainable Development Goals, or there is insufficient evidence, and so on. So this is a very detailed mapping, and the uncertainties in there do exist in terms of the scale. So if you average over large scales like land and ocean ecosystems, then the mapping is not always at local scale. It may be very solid. When you aggregate over large scales, things can get difficult in terms of observed relation with sectors and groups at risk, or relation with sustainable goals. So let's leave it there, just reminding ourselves that these Sustainable Development Goals range from no poverty and zero hunger to peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships for goals. Okay, so you can see again here we have plus means benefits, negative means disbenefits, dot means not clear, here for example, and slash means insufficient evidence, and confidence levels are high for blue, medium for this magenta color or purplish color, and low for the gray colors. Okay, so the stylized way of it has been done is that we are already here in 2022 as IPCC AR6 is being released. Past conditions in terms of emissions, climate change, and development have brought us here with some shocks like the pandemic, and there are opportunities missed along the way which would have taken us here in terms of actions and outcomes characterizing development pathways for well-being, low poverty, ecosystem health, equity, justice, low global warming levels, and low risk. But when you look at the scale down to here, where we have high vulnerability, high poverty, ecosystem degradation, inequity and injustice, high global warming levels, and high risks. So this is the dimension that is being considered. Ecosystem stewardship, knowledge diversity, you can go this way: ecosystem stewardship, equity and justice, inclusion, knowledge and biodiversity. So these are the areas of engagement. So arenas of engagement: community, socio-cultural, political, ecological, knowledge plus technology, economic plus financial. So on the lower end we have these that are going in the opposite direction. So you have ecosystem degradation, singular knowledge, inequity and injustice and exclusion. So not a good situation. So every step we have choices to make: near-term 2030 sustainable development goals, as we've seen before. So warming limited to below 1.5 degrees C, adaptation enables sustainable development. So we will go towards this holistic goal here, but many times you will face natural other shocks, climatic shocks and so on, which will keep on perturbing the system and can push us down here or there, or maybe we will recover and go back, or we will just keep heading down and the shocks will only make it worse, and this will lead to increasing warming, path dependence, and adaptation limits undermine sustainable development goals, and by 2100 we will end up here in terms of climate resilient development, which is absolutely not what we want. So very stylized, but it gives you a sense of the time horizon, so you can project your emission goals, your NDCs, your policies, your technology, socio-cultural, supply side, demand side, mitigation, pathways, adaptation, everything, to see how we can head towards this, and despite any shocks, how can we stay on the path to climate resilient development to ensure well-being and low poverty and so on. Obviously, lessons from the pandemic and the Russian invasion say that this is going to be a great challenge. Climate action is always going to be one step forward and maybe two step forwards, one step back kind of a dance if you are lucky, or one step forward and two steps back if we are unlucky. But 2030 is a great near time horizon which will really put everything in stark contrast in terms of where we are headed in terms of reducing emissions, net zero, reducing global warming and impacts, and adaptation and protecting everybody with gender equity, climate justice and so on. Lofty goals, but we must head in this direction no matter what perturbations come along: socio-economic, natural hazards, pandemics, wars, and so on, right?